What is going on, my fellow ghosts? It is the Blind Prophet, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about what I thought of Ghost of Tsushima after a month of playing it. This is one of my most anticipated games of all time, and I can't wait to discuss what I think about it with you all. So without further hesitation, let's get right into the video. The first thing that I hands down loved about this game was the atmosphere, 100%. Just being that wandering samurai defending your home from threats such as the invading Mongol force, traitorous Straw Hat Ronin, or just everyday bandits taking advantage of the invasion. Every time Jin unsheathes his father's katana, it feels like everything I could have hoped for, and more. The combat isn't insanely difficult, even on lethal mode, but it's very satisfying, especially when switching stances mid-fight and pairing multiple attacks. Your victories don't feel as if you were supposed to win, but that you earned the right to stay standing. And speaking of which, it completes the atmospheric samurai feeling when standing amongst your slain foes. Jin can wipe his katana between his bicep and forearm, sheath it, pull out his flute, and walk away, wind particles flowing behind him. Sucker Punch really captured the feeling of the romanticized Western idea of what a samurai should be and what the world around them should be like. I couldn't have asked for a better atmosphere for this game, which sometimes can be heightened by the game's Kurosawa mode, which showcases the game's clear inspiration from Akira Kurosawa samurai films. The mode filters the game in a black and white film grain, along with condensing some of the sounds to give the idea of a classic 60s film, and it works well for certain aspects of the game, especially the really slow, tense moments like the beginning of a duel. The world is absolutely breathtaking though, and stripping it of its color can feel somewhat of a disservice to the game, at least for the first playthrough. So I'd recommend either toggling the Kurosawa mode or just waiting until you can start a second playthrough. But the mode isn't the only thing paying a direct homage to Kurosawa. Things such as the composition of imagery, like constant flow of movement on screen with elements like wind and leaves. Even the sometimes excessive blood splatter feels ripped right out of one of Kurosawa's many bloody scenes. I can't blame Sucker Punch though, because filmmakers such as George Lucas and my personal hero, Quentin Tarantino, have been inspired by Kurosawa as well, and I don't think if Sucker Punch took as much inspiration as they did, the game would work. But they did, and every part of it comes together to create a truly beautiful atmospheric experience.
Tamuge, face me! The ghost!
I sort of touched on it talking about atmosphere, but I just want to talk about the combat a little more, because it definitely wasn't what I anticipated. I expected a sort of simple block and attack system, especially after finding out the katana would be the only melee weapon in our arsenal, but I was definitely wrong. Not only do a few of the ghost weapons and tactics change things up a bit, but the game has a system that allows you to change your fighting style depending on your current enemy with stances. Rather than using the same moves on a swordsman and an enemy with a spear, you can switch to a stance depending on either one and attack more effectively. This feels more useful, especially when going up against brutes, as your heavy attacks with the moon stance can really open up a heavy to serious damage.
Oh, that's a lot of damage!
Other things such as being able to deliver a critical blow to an enemy by jumping off your horse and slamming into them, or even just jumping and delivering a kick to the face, make the combat fun and gratifying. Especially as mentioned before, when standing amongst your freshly dispatched foes, one maybe has enough strength to try and crawl away, but you drive your blade into their back to end their suffering. There's so many ways to end someone's life in the game, and it can be fun to abandon the story at times and just approach a Mongol camp and have a standoff with a few of the enemies that are closest to you, and then dispatch everyone else with the ferocity and grace of an honorable samurai. Or go to the camp stealthily, hiding in pampas grass and killing men while they do camp chores or sleep, and leave as if you were never there, the only ones really knowing being the now riderless horses. There's so much depth and different facets to the combat. I'm extremely pleased. I even had a moment where, when I was about to go and head into a Mongol camp, my horse was hit by a Mongol, but then two bears sort of came to my rescue and helped me take over the camp. Definitely my favorite gameplay moment. But before we move any further, I wanted to address the big elephant in the room in regards to the stealth aspect and the game being like Assassin's Creed but in Japan. I feel it isn't enough to be compared to Assassin's Creed. Sure, you can assassinate, but that's not all Assassin's Creed is, or at least was. Assassin's Creed isn't even Assassin's Creed anymore. This game definitely has a lot of aspects that feel similar to others, such as climbing up rocks that feels similar to Horizon Zero Dawn, or even the chain assassination, which feels right out of the Batman games. But it mixes all these aspects enough with at least its combat and stealth that I feel it's an unfair comparison to draw it to Assassin's Creed, specifically, which I was one of the biggest culprits of in the beginning, just after seeing the climbing and assassinations. But that's all that could be fairly compared, but just barely. Now, before the game was even released, I couldn't stop listening to The Way of the Ghost, the main theme that gets played intermittently throughout the course of the story. The soundtrack for this game is amazing. It definitely helps bring everything together, every aspect of the game, and elevate the atmosphere. Even the diegetic music, such as the Mongol throat singing that can be heard in Mongol camps, really complete the feel of the whole Mongol invasion. But hands down, one of the best moments of the game has to be the title drop, when Jin is riding through the pampas grass and the Jin Sakai track starts playing.
Say. Damn good stuff, sir.
At that moment, I felt the magic of the world and the experience to come, and I don't think that feeling would have been accomplished without that track. I don't know what else can be said about the music. It's done its job superbly, and I couldn't be happier with that aspect. So if you follow this channel, you probably saw my unboxing fail of sorts when I uploaded a video showing that my steelbook copy came to me dented. I won't make the rest of this video ranting about a steelbook that has nothing to do with the actual gameplay, but it was a steelbook that I invested extra money into, and it definitely left a sour taste in my mouth, especially with this game being one of my most anticipated games of all time. I mean, I built this channel on Ghost of Tsushima, and I got a dented steelbook. Again, just not the greatest feeling.
Brother, you are a warrior. I can see that. You trained your whole life for this. And you have won battles that lesser men have called unwinnable, yes?
Now onto problems I had with the actual game, and we start with the story. This was, for me, the biggest disappointment, ranging from the lack of serious presence from Khotun Khan, who was one of the most intriguing aspects of the game when we first heard his voice whisper, "Samurai," to the lack of quality, both in graphics and acting in the cutscenes. Yes, I feel the acting left a lot to be desired, at least in the English dub, which was almost the only way to play, being that in the Japanese version, the character's lips still mouthed English. So it was a little jarring looking from lips to text to hearing a foreign language, in my opinion. But it's ironic, because the best acting came from Patrick Gallagher, the man behind the voice of the aforementioned Khotun Khan. His scenes were powerful, and everything he said was done so with such presence and confidence. Close behind in performance would probably have to be Jin's uncle, the Jito Lord Shimada. His scenes provided most of the actual conflict for Jin, as they clashed over how to thwart off the Mongols. And these scenes paid off in the end, which I won't spoil, but god, the ending was honestly riveting. And as for the cutscenes themselves graphically, they felt very low in quality, especially coming out of a game such as The Last of Us Part 2 just a month prior that has some of the best cinematic cutscenes and dialogue I've probably ever experienced on PlayStation 4. But that's probably something we can debate in the comment section down below. However, for the rest of the story, it's just a vessel for you to draw your sword and knock your arrow. I didn't find it very compelling until the end of Act 2 and the end of Act 3. Side content wasn't much to talk about, except for maybe the legendary missions, which granted you legendary gear or moves, but even those left much to be desired, as they just end with the feeling of wanting to have been deeper in those stories. I never expected a Red Dead Redemption 2, but for Samurai, I would have absolutely loved it, as I loved RDR 2, but I by no means expected it. What we got just left me wanting more, because I know they could have done better. They had so much potential, and I think the focus was just placed in other facets, such as combat and visuals, which were admittedly successful. But the story definitely could have done with better writing and focus on the acting for the characters. I found Jin to just be hard to follow, as he didn't really seem to have a clear direction. He of course wanted to save his island and his people, but especially when it came to the ghost, he always waved it aside. Which could have been him just being modest of his actions and not wanting to get caught up in a fairy tale. But that's what we as the player want. I want to be the hero, the legend, but Jin just brought everything back down to earth. He embraced the combat aspect, and this is when he shines, but it's still not enough. It would have been nice to have seen the sort of Spider-Man approach to the ghost, where maybe Jin would try to hide this sort of alter ego from his uncle, and at one point maybe his uncle and a group of samurai capture Jin, as they do in the game, and everything still plays out as it had, but Jin is more invested in the ghost, and in turn, so are we. But hopefully they rectify this in the possible sequel, as it seems Jin does embrace the ghost at the end of the game. Now, I by no means am a historian, but I do take moderate interest in history, and I also am extremely aware that Ghost of Tsushima wasn't going for complete time period accuracy, which is apparent, being the katana your main weapon in the game wasn't even invented yet in the setting. The katana was actually somewhat a product of the events of the invasion, as the Japanese swords at the time were inferior to the Mongols' armor. And Sucker Punch taking that history and twisting it to their narrative served well for the most part, but I feel if they did just a bit more research, it could have made the game so much more immersive. An extremely jarring aspect of the historical inaccuracy to me was the lack of representation to the true nature of Mongol archery. Yes, the archers are a pain in the butt, but they are nothing compared to what they should have been. Mongols were known to be some of the best archers in history, which is impressive in its own right, but they were horseback archers on top of this. So this was a glaring issue for me when not once did I ever come across a Mongol archer on horseback. The Japanese were also known to have been horseback archers, but even the implied best archer in the game, Sensei Ishikawa, always draws his bow while standing stationary. And Sensei Ishikawa brings me to another point in the archery that just got to a comical level, where his side story takes you on a quest to find his apprentice, who joins up the Mongol forces to teach them Ishikawa's way of the bow. This was just weird, because as stated prior, the Mongols were more than capable archers, so they would not need an inferior Japanese tactic from a man who stands still on solid ground and shoots. I feel it would have been nice to maybe have seen a side storyline that would have you find a Mongol archer leader and do one of the legendary missions that would have you learn their way of the bow, and it provided a sort of Deadeye mechanic or something while on horseback, or even an Assassin's Creed jump shot, which in itself isn't probably historically accurate, but it would have been more respectful representation than just making the Mongols out to be primitive archers. So just to wrap up the negative side of the game really quick, I have just a few nitpicks. First of which was the underutilization of the grappling hook that is given to you after a few hours in the game. The tool is mainly used just for traversal, and at times I really only found myself using it in story missions. I would have loved to have seen it used to grapple enemies, or just used in combat in general. Just something to make it feel more than just the tool used for scripted moments. Poses for Jin would have been really nice as well for the photo mode. The photo mode is really great. I'll have some of my own screenshots up right now, but I just felt limited to the certain types of scenes I could do with the inability to pose Jin. Something that Horizon Zero Dawn's photo mode made great use of with the plethora of poses for Aloy. I found myself also getting tired of the same interactions with the foxes and yellow birds. Some variety in that would have been nice, like maybe running across a wounded bear that would lead you to a cave with a collectible item if you fought off its attackers, or maybe a deer that could have led you to a stream with a haiku location. They could have done so much more to keep those interactions varied and not so repetitive. Yuna honestly could have been a better main character for the game, as she showed a strong promise but relied so heavily on Jin. If she was given her own platform, I feel she could have been a stronger lead than Jin. Same could honestly be made for Ryuzo, who, if we followed him, we probably would have gotten a setting closer to RDR2 with his camp of Straw Hats. Finally, one I know a lot of us have gotten frustrated with several times while playing, which is the lack of lock-on during combat. This is something I find myself constantly wishing I had due to the large attacks and rolls and wide parries that could have some enemies go off screen at times, and it makes the combat disorienting at certain points. But that's pretty much my thoughts as of right now, after having played the game a month now. I'm on my second playthrough, and some of my issues with the game have sort of dissolved, but these were the ones that definitely still stand out. All in all, I do enjoy the game a lot, and would definitely like to see Sucker Punch round out some of the minor edges, hopefully in a sequel. They definitely accomplished what they were shooting for, and I think some of my gripes might just be from being so excited for the game that I expected maybe too much of it. But what do you guys think? Did you love the game? Did you hate it? Are you kind of in the middle? Do you think we'll get a sequel? Let's talk about it in the comments down below, as I'd love to know and love engaging with you all. But as always, stay hydrated, let them pass in peace, and Excelsior.